This is Goku-san DBZ, and I was asked my personal opinion on fighting games. 2D versus 3D. And yes, you hear in the background music from a couple of different fighting games, stages from many different games, 3D and 2D alike. But my question is my opinion of course, 2D fighting games versus 3D fighting games. Which do I think is better? With that said, I'd like to answer this with my viewpoint. And frankly, in my view, both have their ups and their downs. Both I like equally, and I like each for different reasons. But as we know, of course, 2D fighters were the beginning of the fighting game genre. And really the first game of what would become later a major franchise would be released in 1987 for the Sega Master System. And it was not a big success. It sold less than 100,000 copies worldwide and sold predominantly in Europe because that's where the Sega Master System did its best. It was a little fighting game called Street Fighter. Street Fighter, incredible. Not the first game, but in 1991 we would see the release of Street Fighter 2 with about 4 or 5 different versions released on multiple consoles, like 10 platforms if I remember correctly. And yes, the music you hear in the background is from Tekken 3, Heihachi Mishima theme, if you want to know. But anyways, and of course we would see in around 92 to 93 time frame the birth of the first 3D fighting game, which of course is hands down probably the one that really started putting 3D on the map, of course, graphically speaking. Originally released in arcades and then released on the Sega CD, but also was released on the Sega 32X as well, in basic 3D. Then you would get a re-release on the Sega Saturn called Remix Edition. But the next game, exclusively to Saturn, though it got a 2D release on the Genesis, and the game that would put 3D fighters on the map was Virtua Fighter franchise. Indeed, Virtua Fighter, had not been for this series, we don't know where 3D games would be today. Virtua Fighter to 3D is like Street Fighter to 2D games. And probably the best version, in most people's opinions, of Street Fighter is Street Fighter 2 Turbo, or Championship Edition, on the Sega Genesis. Now, a lot of people like the gameplay elements of 2D or 3D. Some like just overall prefer the 3D and stuff, because a lot of 3D fighters were starting to experiment to let you be able to do like side steps and be able to dodge attacks, which was introduced by Virtua Fighter, but would become and would also be introduced by another smaller franchise, less successful, but still known, called Battle Arena Toshinden. And next, Namco would decide to throw themselves into the fray and released the first game of a franchise called Tekken. And Tekken would go on to become really the flagship of 3D fighters, because it is still incredibly successful to this day. And of course next year we have Tekken 7 Fated Retribution coming out, with Akuma in the story arc. But great game to introduce the Tekken franchise, and good music for the most part. And it would help establish Namco as a juggernaut in fighting games, and would allow them to rival 2 other big companies at the time. Well, to be fair, 4 I guess, because at the time Sega was a force to be reckoned with in that genre. 2D successes on their Sega Genesis, such as Eternal Champions, or of course their Virtua Fighter series. SNK would throw their hat into the race as well, if you will, with the Neo Geo introducing people to franchises such as Samurai Showdown, King of Fighting series, which is still around, and of course would begin on the Sega Genesis Center platforms, have a series called Fatal Fury, which ended several years back last decade. Fatal Fury series ended, unfortunately, but King of Fighting lives on and will keep those series alive. Now, with that said, next up, we go to Mortal Kombat. And yes, Mortal Kombat 1 and 2 were great games. Mortal Kombat 3 took a lot of stuff farther, graphically speaking, in the 2D genre. Of course, with much more crisp design graphics, better quality sound for the music, and more interesting backgrounds with a more post-apocalyptic type design, given the invasion of Outworld in our world, with Shao Kahn leading the charge, and introducing us to new characters, such as, of course, the younger brother, Sub-Zero. Also introduced us to Cyrax and Sector, the robot, cyber ninjas. Also introduced us to other characters in the franchise, such as Shiva and Motaro of the Centaurs. But would introduce us to many new characters, indeed. Of course, we got a new design of Kano in the game. Only a few originals would make their return in the franchise. Of course, we would get the Metal Arm Jax in the game. Of course, we would also see the return of characters such as Sonya Blade. We would also see the return of characters like, of course, Liu Kang and Scorpion, which is really one of the only originals that has hung around pretty much every single game. But it's an incredible game. Then we would also see, in the same time frame in the nice other franchises to try to contend in the against Mortal Kombat and other stuff, which would have their own versions of fatalities. First game of two games at the time would be released. First one on the Super Nintendo, of course, Killer Instinct, with their figurehead franchise mascot, Fogor, which is sort of like Predator meets Terminator, with other elements also. Really cool looking design for the most part. Killer Instinct is one of those few that actually, of course, died out when Rare disappeared, but would return many years later. Next, another franchise we would see rise up out of the craze of the 3D fighters, which you're hearing music playing right now from this game, for Ryu Hayabusa of the Ninja Gaiden series, and that being released on the Sega Dreamcast originally. Best version as far as I'm concerned. Dead or Alive 2. The Dead or Alive franchise has actually stuck around and remained pretty strong, and has gained a loyal fan base over the years, and I'm one of those fans that started with the original on the PlayStation, that was also released on the Sega Saturn. Is an incredible game franchise and in general great. Definitely a perfect example of positives with the 3D genre of games. Free moving, be able to walk side to side, full movement, and be able to knock a person from one platform to the other. And would have maybe the best fighting game mechanics of any 3D fighter ever. And a great reversal system where you could reverse certain people's attacks against them. That is one thing that may set Dead or Alive separate from many other fighting game series. But Dead or Alive continued on really the work of Virtua Fighter, which has more or less died out over the years, while Dead or Alive has remained. We've seen many other unique games in the 90s, fighting game-wise, like this series by Squaresoft, or Square Enix, which only had like 2 or 3 games in the series. Bushido Blade, which is a weapon-based combat fighting game, of course, but it's not with a normal life gauge and things like most fighting games of this time period you would see. In fact, this franchise, you did like basic weak hits, it would just injure the opponent. If you did like a fatal blow, the person would immediately die. So this is a fighting game that's based around really real life, because like in Soul Calibur, those blows and stuff would have killed somebody in reality. In this game, it would. It's a really great series. Bashia Blade 1 is probably considered by most to be the best, but it's also insanely overpriced. This is just as good gameplay-wise, and it's about 25% of a quarter of the price of the first game. And I highly recommend you check out Bashia Blade if you're a fan of good fighting games. It's definitely an example of great early 3D fighters, and unique. You would see other Incredibles on the Dreamcast, 2D fighters starting to introduce 3D backgrounds with it, but continuing with the same combat system. And of course that would be the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 for the Sega Dreamcast, though it was released on the Xbox and of course released on the PlayStation 2. In my view, the Dreamcast version is by far the best. 56 characters you could play as on this game, which is insane to think given this was released around 2000, 2001 time frame. So that's insane to think about. Next up, a truly perfect example of a experimental franchise that would introduce and would become a flagship franchise of Nintendo. A fighting game unlike any other. Super Smash Bros. Released, of course, originally on the Nintendo 64. With only first party, of course, characters. Mario, Star Fox, Pikachu, Kirby, and many others. Definitely good for any old school fan of course, the Nintendo franchises. And it's a classic game, and if you're gonna get this game, if you have an N64, you better get it before the price gets insanely overpriced. Because trust me, it's going up, and you want to get it while it's still in a reasonable price range. But it's an incredible game. Only one I have because I don't have anything past the N64, Nintendo-wise. You want to talk about experimenting with like 3D fighters and stuff? Try this from the exclusively released on the Sega Dreamcast. It's called Psychic Force 2012. You could harness the elements like energy balls, fireballs, things like that, and you basically flew around on the stage, so it gave a little different feel than your standard. And you want to talk about unique franchises that would be introduced also. Bloody Roar franchise, which would end up producing, I say 5 games because there's just 2 different names for one game. Extreme and Primal Fury. Of course, released originally in 1997, the very first game on the original PlayStation. 2001, this would be released, the first on the next generation consoles. Bloody Roar 3. Incredible game series. And of course would allow you to move around freely. Then franchises would continue evolving through time, like the Tekken franchise, with the release of Tekken 5 in 2004 on the PlayStation 2, with arcade versions of Tekken's 1, 2, and 3, a special story mode, but maybe easily one of the 3 best in the franchise and one of the best 3D fighters of all time. Incredible gameplay-wise. And I think perfected exclusive to the PS2, Soul Calibur 3 to me is the best out of all the Soul Calibur franchise. My personal favorite is Soul Calibur for the Dreamcast, but Soul Calibur 3 perfected the gameplay elements, the battle mechanics, the music, the graphics. It is a perfect addition and truly is the crowning jewel of the franchise in my view. It was when the franchise reached its peak and definitely possibilities. And then it would start going downhill, unfortunately. We would see more incredible crossover 2D fighters thanks to Capcom, like Capcom vs. SNK 2 EO for the original Xbox. Another incredible game. then we would see 2D fighters starting to play, well, 3D fighters starting to play like 2D fighters. And a great crossover, of course, like Street Fighter versus or cross Tekken. Crossing over the Tekken franchise and the Street Fighter franchise, which is insane to think about. And yes, 2D fighters, and it's interesting over the years, many 3D fighting games, which Mortal Kombat, example as you hear in the background, decided to experiment with sidesteps in MK4/MK Gold, and would start allowing free movement in their franchise in Deadly Alliance, then Deception, and Armageddon. But then with the reboot, brought back and started only allowing free movement, and like would take away the free movement and go back to 2D style gameplay with current day 3D graphics, and they would use the same style fight engine also in, of course, Injustice Gods Among Us as well, besides the reboot. And of course Street Fighter would keep that in the Street Fighter 3D games, would continue using the 2D style fighting with no sidesteps or free roaming, which people thought everything would go strictly free roam, such as Tekken and such as Soul Calibur and Dead or Alive are probably the main franchises still alive today that still remain allowing free roaming, while Mortal Kombat went backwards back to 2D style gameplay with current day graphics and everything, which I think actually is a great harken back to those of us who grew up with fighting games in the 90s, but with current day graphics to introduce to younger generations the great gameplay elements of 2D style games. But I still like my occasional 3D games, gameplay wise, be able to free move. But you do have those still alive thanks to Dead or Alive, Soul Calibur, and thanks to, of course, Tekken. We're able to still enjoy the style gameplay, but if you don't appreciate the 3D style gameplay, you have the 2D with the newer Mortal Kombat games and stuff. And of course, this was just released this week, the new Killer Instinct game, but this is called the Definitive Edition. This has all 3 seasons of characters, which total gives you 26 characters. And yes, it's an Xbox One exclusive, with actually a character from, of course, the Gears of War. You have a character from Halo franchise in it. You also have a character from Battletoads in it. Why not, since Microsoft owns Rare now? And I can't wait. I just picked it up yesterday. I can't wait to use it. And also to activate the special code for this character. A special gold skin of him. And underneath this disc, you get the actual original soundtrack to the game. Which is awesome, because the music is incredible. For any hard rock metal fans, you'll definitely appreciate Killer Instinct. But like I mentioned with 3D fighters with 2D style gameplay elements, Killer Instinct is the same way as the newer Mortal Kombat, as Street Fighter. So you have some major fighting franchises, like half of them represent the old 2D style gameplay with 3D upgrade graphics. So that way, you can appease 2 groups of people. You can appease the 2D fighter fans who only appreciate the 2D style. Now it's true, it won't please all 2D fighter fans, though I think a lot of them will be pleased at least with the 2D battle and fighting game mechanics and gameplay elements. More will be a harken back to the 90s, and will make at least half the group of 2D fans more happy with at least the style of battle mechanics and fighting game mechanics that they grew up with, same as me. But will also appease the 3D fans who like 3D graphics and things. Though there are also those 2D fire fans which will not want it at all. And to those people, I recommend then, if you got a PS3 or something, then you need to special order on Amazon or on eBay from Japan and get imported Vampire Resurrection. It's an HD collection of the Darkstalker games, HD for PS3. So that way you have your full 3D game with HD treatment with 2D game. So that should make those people very happy. And reworked on the music, making it improved for the newer generation of console. But yeah, a lot of the great current day 2D games being made are not being released in America, exclusively in Japan. But anyways, this has been a video just explaining my view on the culture of fighting games, and in general just my view at things from the outside, because I personally don't want to get involved in the 2D versus 3D war going on between fighting game fans. I'm somebody who appreciates both groups for what they've done, revolutionizing gaming. And I'm here back when fighting games was the big thing in the 90s. Now, it's more of a novelty genre, really, because you only have a few major franchises. Thanks to Microsoft, of course, Killer Instinct franchise at least has been resurrected. Oh yeah, and by the way, this also has the full arcade playable versions of Killer Instinct and Killer Instinct 2/Gold. So, if you're a Killer Instinct fan and you have an Xbox One or planning on getting one, I recommend you get Killer Instinct Definitive Edition. It's not even $60. It was released with a $40 price tag, so 25% less expensive. So, with that said, I'm getting off, and the music you hear in the background is the Big Boss Man's theme for the Killer Instinct Season 3. And it's incredible if you appreciate metal music. Anyways, follow me at twitter.com/GokuSunDBZ, as well as Google+. And of course, I'm now at Tumblr. And please leave a comment. Tell me, which is your preferred? 2D fighters? 3D fighters? Or are you like me, and appreciate both for what each has done for gaming? And let me know if you'd like me to do any more future videos on any other genres of gaming or any particular franchises. Anyways, see you soon enough. Enjoy the music.